Thanks for joining us. I'm Nancy Furness, and this is We've Got Issues. We're filming on site at Coquitlam City Centre Library, and we'd like to thank the library for offering us this space to carry out the interviews. And before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge that the interviews are taking place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of Coquitlam First Nation. So we thank the Coquitlam people who continue to live on these lands and to care for the lands and the waters and all that lies above and below. So today I have the pleasure of being joined by Mayor Richard Stewart, who is the mayor of the city of Coquitlam. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Always a pleasure, Nancy.
Well, we're going to talk about some of the challenges that are facing Coquitlam right now, and we're going to try and cover everything from housing and infrastructure challenges right through to homelessness. So
I have a meeting tomorrow. So.
As long as it's tomorrow, we should be fine. So we're going to jump right in. Sorry.
Okay.
And I know these are big questions, but I also am confident that you are fully up to answering them.
Let's do it.
The first question is, the province has recently mandated some pretty significant densification requirements for the city of Coquitlam and all municipalities over the population of 5,000 in BC. There's two bills in particular that I want to touch on. And the first one is Bill 44. So it's the small scale multi-unit housing. And it basically says that the city must allow duplexes, triplexes, and even fourplexes on residential lots that are right now have been designated for single residential units. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to us a little bit about what are some of the challenges that this has caused the city, and how are you approaching it?
Well, first and foremost, we were a leader in this. We, more than a decade ago, started allowing up to 4 units on, and these are detached homes, mm-hmm. 4 houses on specific lots in lots of parts of Coquitlam, primarily flat land with a lane.
With infrastructure?
Infrastructure was in place. We could do those, and we've seen some really successful examples of that. Unfortunately, not every lot is going to be amenable to that kind of densification. And some neighborhoods simply don't have the infrastructure in place. The pipes aren't big enough. It makes it problematic for some neighborhoods. But we were, as I say, we were very successful in those neighborhoods where it does work. To now have to respond in neighborhoods where it's not going to work, or it's not going to work anywhere near as well. These are problematic realities that every municipality faces.
So there were neighborhood plans in place, and that the city had been working on for quite some time. And now with this sort of mandatory requirement, it just applies blanket to all areas. Like, there's been changes in the official community plan to address that. Is that correct?
Yes. So under provincial legislation, municipalities are required to plan ahead. We do mm-hmm. official community plans, and we make those amendments regularly to make sure that the planning is in place so that the pipes will be, we'll be able to upgrade pipes when they're necessary and make it so that the pipes will meet the official
future
community
needs,
plan.
Yeah.
When the province comes in and then says, to heck with your official community plans that you spent so much time on, we're changing it all. We're going to do it from Victoria, one size fits all. This is, mm-hmm. From now on, every lot in the province is now 4 units, and any transit hubs are going to be densified, whether there are barriers to that or not. So, the example in Coquitlam perhaps is there's a small cul-de-sac off of Langara Court near Dooney Trunk and the bottom end of Mariner. That cul-de-sac has been designated as an assembly by a local realtor who's gathered up all the homes and said, we're going to list them for a total of something like $35 million for the 6
This is within the
7
transit-oriented
Yes, this
area.
is within the circle.
Yes.
So from the Coquitlam Central Station, you can't walk in 800 meters to get to this place, but the measurements in the legislation are as the crow flies. So there's a train track in the way, there's Hoy Creek is in the way, there's 2 major intersections in the way, and you simply can't. unfortunately, when you measure as the crow flies, then a whole bunch of properties that aren't suitable for redevelopment to that density
You can't
are
just
going to be
put a
kept there.
circle down and.
Well, you know, we have one, for example, on Gautier in South Coquitlam that is a high-rise site if you wanted it, because it's within a stone's throw of the Braid station. You can't walk there because of the freeway and the train track and the Brunette River.
Right.
All three of those are barriers. So to walk would be about 1.5 kilometers. To drive would be a little bit further than that. The idea that that's transit-oriented density is ludicrous, and yet the development industry is going out and selling the idea to lots of residents. They now think they have a $4 million property when they thought they used to have only a $1 million or $1.5 million property. So it has some effects on them, but it also changes the neighborhood, and it results in tarps on roof. People who don't maintain their houses anymore because
they're speculating.
They're speculating that it's going to get torn down and there's going to be a high rise here on the right next to the freeway.
So has it changed land prices?
No, I don't think the price has gone up. It certainly has changed people's expectations.
Okay.
So the asking,
so there's a gap between expectation.
a massive gap. There's a property on Langara Court that I think it's listed for $8 million. It's worth $1.5 million.
Wow.
And they're not going to get $8 million.
There's going to be some disappointment there.
Well, I hope they don't spend it before they get it.
Yeah, let's hope.
Yeah.
So did the city have were they consulted, or do they have any mechanism to push back on this?
No, municipalities generally weren't consulted. There were a few people that were shown draft legislation under an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, which is a terrible way to
Not
consult.
transparent.
Not transparent at all. And so they couldn't then go to their councils if they were elected officials, or go back to their staff of their municipality in the case of planners, and say, like, what do you guys think here? So it was not there was no consultation, no meaningful consultation at all. It was simply one person, the Minister of Housing, I guess, thought he's smarter at housing than anyone that's been spending their career in city planning.
You sound
and architecture.
skeptical.
I was frustrated because my career was in housing, and none of this was going to work, and it hasn't worked. And in fact, one of the main effects was that it slowed down a whole bunch of development right away, because now there was this dangled piece of extra windfall that
the carrot that maybe
it just made it messy. And it also resulted in assemblies that are nowhere near the infrastructure that we need to be able to support a high-rise development. It's not going to be a high-rise, but even if we did want it to be a high-rise, the pipe's not big enough, and it won't be big enough for the next 20 years, because that's not a piece of infrastructure that's scheduled to be replaced right now. It's only a few years old. And so these kinds of decisions that are blind to the infrastructure needs of a neighborhood, they're not going to work.
Well, you talk about infrastructure needs for the neighborhood, which is one big issue, but also the neighborhood itself is changing sometimes unexpectedly to what the city plans were originally. Do the public have any input into this? Like, are there public hearings that they can go to when these changes happen, or are those public hearings no longer happening?
No, unfortunately, the province actually outlawed public hearings for any OCP compliant rezonings. So we were required to make sure our OCP is aligned with the province's new dictates. And then now that they align, we're not allowed even to have a public hearing. And in fact, at the beginning of those kinds of council meetings, if there's people gathered in the council chamber, I have to say, I'm sorry, we're not allowed to hear you.
I think it's a big change.
It's a massive change. Public hearings aren't perfect, but our council embraced them. We thought, no, we were absolutely ready to have a public hearing for any rezoning and have people come in and tell us their concerns. And quite often we got a jewel of something. You're right, it should have a loading bay, or maybe the loading bay should come in for that.
So there's value in those.
There can be
hearings.
incredible value in a public hearing. But I'm not sure why they wouldn't have simply said you don't have to have a public hearing on that. But instead,
Right,
they
it's
say,
not mandatory.
we're not allowed to.
Yeah.
I can't even, we can't call a meeting of the public to hear their perspectives on these kinds of
Well,
things.
there's something to be said when your residents feel heard, and also when they don't feel heard. Are you hearing anything from them? Any sort of concerns about removing those public hearings?
We certainly are. For example, we actually had a public hearing a couple of months ago. There were two major items on the agenda. One was in the Coquitlam area. It was a rezoning that was OCP compliant, and another one was a rezoning that was not OCP compliant, so we had to change the OCP as well. And so we were prepared to do both. But because one of them didn't comply with the OCP, we had to have a public hearing for that one. Unfortunately, it was the other residents, the residents around the OCP compliant one in Coquitlam, that wanted to be heard. And they came out en masse to talk to council. And we had to not let them speak during the public hearing for the OCP. In fact, nobody spoke on the OCP compliant, or the one where we had to change the OCP. And the one where we didn't have to change the OCP, those people wanted to be heard and we couldn't hear from them because the province says that's illegal.
Which is really a lost opportunity in a way.
It really is.
It's, yeah.
Yeah, it is. And not only that, but the change in the Coquitlam one was because the province had set the circle, and that property was now within the circle. And so while they have lots of concerns, those residents.
Are they legitimate concerns?
I think some of them are legitimate. I think I would have liked to have heard them. I would like to have heard them. We did get to read some of their emails and things, the emails that were sent in to us. But to be able to have someone stand there and at least express the specific concerns so that we can amend the plan if it's appropriate.
So there's an opportunity.
And bluntly, an opportunity for them to feel like they had some input into the neighborhood they've lived in for so many years.
Right. It's hard to see your neighborhood change like that and not to feel that you have any say or input into it.
Yes.
You've talked about infrastructure. I'm going to quote you. So you've said we can't build homes without the infrastructure to support them. So what kinds of infrastructure are especially needed, and how does Coquitlam plan on funding them?
Well, there's two kinds of infrastructure. There's infrastructure that quote applies to. There's obviously we can't build homes unless there's also a sewer pipe that leads from that property. There's water pipes and there's fire hydrants and those kinds of things that are necessary to make. They're essentially part of the new homes that are being built in a neighborhood. But there's other infrastructure like the local parks and the
Well, let's talk about the pipes and stuff first, and then we'll move on and talk about that, because as you say, it's maybe two different things.
Yeah, you could technically build housing without parks.
Right.
I wouldn't want to.
Right. I wouldn't want to see that either.
We want it to be a complete community. But the other stuff, the pipes, for example, our OCP has been in development for 40 years, and we're making sure that the pipe plans, when a pipe gets 65 years old, someone in engineering goes through and inspects it with a camera, and we schedule that one for replacement. We decide how big the replacement will be based on the OCP.
Right, because you've got that plan.
Yeah, we've got a plan that says, oh yeah, we're going to have high density housing there, and and there's a park here and that sort of stuff. And then the province comes in and says, forget all that.
Right. We
think it should be this. And so now the pipe we just put in, replacement pipe we just put in, is no longer big enough for the development that the province has imposed on us.
Is there any compensation from the province or support?
No. The province did give every municipality a bit of cash in order to work their way through the changes, because we all had to try to hire consultants and
through the changes in the OCP.
Changes in the OCP, changes in the zoning. We had to rezone large parts of the city. And now and of course make the changes to the OCP, and then change the policies related to the SHMU, we call it, the small scale multi-unit
housing. It's a mouthful for sure.
Yes. So all of those changes required us to spend money.
And maybe take resources from other things that you had planned on doing and put them into.
And that was a big frustration, was that we had lots of applications, and where Coquitlam has been a leader in processing applications and approving housing
Well,
projects.
it's not like there was no development happening in
No.
Coquitlam. There's a lot of development happening. So was that not taken into consideration by the province? Or because I thought you were on target for your
Well, it was funny
housing.
because we're approaching next week is the Union of BC Municipalities Conference in Victoria. 2 years ago, I was at the UBCM
Right.
conference, and the Minister of Housing at the time, Minister Rankin, stood at the podium, and I asked him bluntly, and he answered the question to all of the assembled elected officials: Coquitlam's doing it right. Do what Coquitlam is doing, because they're really building a lot of housing.
Right.
And then a month later, the province made what we're doing illegal. We can't do what we were just praised for doing. We are no longer
You got
allowed
on the
to
naughty
do it.
list.
Well, everybody is effectively now. I wouldn't call it a naughty list, because now it encompasses the fastest building municipalities
Right.
like Burnaby and Coquitlam, Township of Langley. You end up with communities that couldn't possibly have been building any faster,
Right.
and they now have a housing target order. And we'll get to that, I suspect, in one of your questions. But so it was intensely frustrating to be praised by the housing minister, and then as soon as the housing minister changed, the new housing
Right.
minister makes what we were praised for doing illegal. And we're not allowed to do that anymore, and we're taking away the sources of development revenue that would pay for the pipes in the ground, and we're going to do this, and then we're going to force you to put all your staff over on this. Instead of
Right.
approving projects, now your staff are going to be rezoning for all of these new rules.
Okay, let's talk about that a little bit more then. I think you've touched on development cost charges. So can you tell us, first of all, what are they and why are they important to the city? Just for people who maybe aren't familiar with them.
So the mantra typically is development should pay for itself. That we shouldn't be imposing on taxpayers costs associated with new development.
So does that mean like building roads or maybe putting in pipes?
The building in roads,
and
the building
amenities?
of pipes to connect new buildings. That should be funded by the process of developing these new communities. And I agree with that. And we worked a lot with the Ministry of Housing 30 years ago in trying to develop the tools that will allow that. So the development cost charge is typically, how do you connect this building to the rest of the grid?
Right. Okay. Make it part of that system.
Yes.
Okay.
Now there's other ones. There's a school site acquisition cost. The new development must also acquire schools. Well, that's provincial.
Okay.
So the property for the schools has to be funded out of people that don't currently own homes.
And it can be a long-term prospect.
A long-term prospect, and those people may never have their kids in those schools because the schools won't be built until after the development
first generation
is
goes.
Yes. So there's that kind of development cost charge and various other charges by levels of government, including the new sewage charge from Metro Vancouver that handles the cost of population growth. Development cost charges should never be used to fund population growth, because there's lots of reasons.
So are they
why
more
shouldn't.
like amenities and
They're supposed to fund just the components necessary to make
directly
that
associated with it? Okay.
And so, and then there were others. There was a community amenity charge that was for some communities negotiated with developers. Ours was a very specific. And there was one more, and that was 30 years ago. I was in the room when we did it. We convinced the Minister of Housing that bonus density should be a tool that municipalities could have to incentivize such things as childcare and affordable housing and those sorts of things.
So a developer would get an extra unit or floor or something, and then in return for that, they would pay for supporting a daycare center or a park.
So it doesn't increase the cost of housing because it's voluntary upon the developer. They bought their land, and now they've got another tool that allows them, well, I can get a bit more, and we could actually lower the cost of housing by getting this extra density and building a childcare facility or whatever.
So hopefully a win-win.
Win-win, and it was working really well from and the development community loved it. We were getting a lot of rental housing and non-market, below-market rental housing, childcare facilities, all incentivized rather than imposed, with the costs being borne by the people that buy into the building.
Right.
Unfortunately, that was wiped out. We now are having to switch all of our systems to the second one, the one where it's imposed, and it actually adds to the costs to new
okay.
buyers. And let's face it, the only ones that pay those now are people who don't currently own homes. The first-time buyer pays
So they're being
all the charges.
punished?
We've decided that affordable housing in BC will be funded by people who don't own homes. And those of us who do own homes won't fund the need for affordable housing, which I think is bad public policy, and I've spoken against it my whole career. Unfortunately, that's the rule of the day in British Columbia now, is that the cost of the population growth and the necessities for affordability have to be borne. All of those costs should be borne by the first-time buyer.
Is there any way to balance that out somehow through property tax or something like that? Is that not feasible?
Well, property tax is one tool. The tool we had was probably the best tool, and Minister Rankin seemed to agree.
Which didn't transfer that cost to the first-time buyer.
It was costs that were borne entirely by incentives rather than by penalties.
Right.
And so economists will tell you that in that circumstance, the wholesale price of land goes down because the bidding is less high.
Oh, okay.
Because they know
Right.
that they can buy additional density using childcare facilities or non-market rental housing or whatever.
So you need an understanding of how things are all connected if you're going to make these changes. And it sounds like maybe a little bit more background would have been helpful before some of those changes were imposed.
Well, there's no question that housing, like anything, is incredibly more complicated and complex than most
Supply
people
and
really.
demand.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the engine underneath the hood of a car is more complicated now than it used to be, and I don't know anything about it. So
Well, at least you're honest. I don't either. So.
But if I were minister responsible, it wouldn't be a good idea for me to impose some new law of physics on this engine without knowing the ramifications, whether it will work. We said right away, this isn't going to work, and the minister said, trust me. And now it hasn't worked. It completely turned the tap off to the point where even before Trump's tariffs, we were having no housing applications because the financing had dried up.
So this new housing legislation, if I just heard you correctly, you're saying it's slowing down development. It's not actually increasing the rate of development, or like the applications have gone down?
Way down, way down.
Okay.
I've been, so I used to go to a groundbreaking of a new project every week or so, every 2 weeks certainly. I've been to one this year.
Okay, interesting.
And
is there a mechanism for feedback to the province? Like, was there anything put in place to, like, maybe let's, 6 months down the road or a year down the road, let's check back in and see how this is working, and maybe there's an opportunity to make some adjustments, or is that not happening?
It's often attributed to Churchill. No matter how beautiful the plan is, revisit it every now and then to see if it's working.
Words of wisdom.
I'm paraphrasing, and I'm not sure it was Churchill. It's been attributed to him though. But that's the thing. We have a system. I was speaking with the new Minister of Housing, former councillor.
Christine Boyle?
Yep, former councillor in Vancouver, just 3 weeks ago, and I said, "This isn't going to work, you know." She says, "Yes, I guess probably from her experience at local government." I think I felt heard, but I don't know that some of these changes you can't go back. Once you've allowed people to be buying land at these higher prices that are instilled by this mandatory 5 FSR of density, you can't go back and say, well, we're going to cut that back, because those developers will go bankrupt because they paid too much for their land.
They'll be coming after somebody for compensation.
Exactly. So this is when you make that kind of earth-shattering change to the way the housing market
and very
works,
quickly.
I worry that there's no way to fix it now. We're going to have about, I don't know the numbers exactly, but I suspect less than half this year what we were doing in peak years, even though the province's goal was to get more housing built more quickly, it's resulting in less housing built.
Interesting situation. I have to ask you a question about trees and the urban forest. There's a group locally called Tri-Cities Urban Forest Working Group, and they've been very active and I think have done a lot of really good research and have a good background and feel for what's happening under this housing legislation. They have a concern about the urban forest being, decimated through unprecedented development. So, when you put a single dwelling and turn it into a fourplex on these mandatory places that maybe weren't necessarily, you weren't necessarily expecting to put that development, it has an effect on the urban forest. And, with climate change and urban heat islands and all those concerns, what is Coquitlam doing to address this? Is there anything you can do to protect the urban forest in light of all this development?
It is, lots of communities find this intensely frustrating because the province, just on the schmooze side, the small scale multi-unit residential, it mandates the least efficient form of housing. Let's face it, we're going to take an existing house, probably with a suite, so that's 2 units, and we're going to tear it down, we're going to build 4 units. So a net 2, and we got to rip up the road because we're probably going to have to do some new piping and all that kind of stuff. So the amount of inspections, the amount of the labor intensity of that development is incredibly high. It's the highest labor intensity of any kind of development in our community.
The benefit.
We get almost no benefit really. It's 2 new units, but we throw all kinds of work at it. It's not like townhouses or
you're getting
6-story
densification.
You get say dozens of new units. No, this is two new units, and you lose all the trees.
There's no
way to save any trees.
Time and time again. Yeah. Is there no tools at the municipality's disposal? Like I know the urban forestry department in Coquitlam has done a really good job in I'm not sure if it's the urban forestry department, but the city of Coquitlam has planted a lot of trees, and I think there is, a real concern, and the will is there because there's a lot of beautiful areas in Coquitlam, but we're also seeing so many trees come down.
And that was the concentric circles that were required in Bill 47, the transit-oriented development. It essentially didn't allow for trees. It said that this parcel over here that's within 200 meters is allowed a 30-story high-rise. In order to park a 30-story high-rise, you have to go down about 3 stories underground.
And do your parking. Maybe less parking now. But
you might not have to do as much parking. We have pretty low parking requirements for that stuff. Yeah. And the few developments that have come in since have been about the same ratio. I don't think developers are willing to put up buildings with no parking because they won't sell. So they're going to have some parking in them, and that means you have to pretty much dig a hole that's the size of the lot down 3 stories. Obviously, if there were trees on that, the trees are gone. You cannot. The root network for a 40-year-old cherry tree that was planted by the previous owner is probably half the lot, and you can't. Obviously, if you're going to put that much density on that property, you can't tuck it in there and go down 18 stories of underground parking in order to do the 30 stories above. It's simply not viable to save trees on these properties. Same thing with the SHMU, the small scale multi-unit housing on single family lots requires that pretty much from 20 feet from the front property line all the way to the rear lane is going to be structure.
Kind of corner to corner to corner.
Corner to corner to corner, because they're allowed to build 4 units, and if it's close to a transit line, a hub, they're allowed to build 6 units. We don't, and that's for any lot bigger than 1,800 square feet. We don't have any lots that small. All of our lots are bigger. Right. So that means that every single lot, think of the smallest lot you can think of, that can have 4 houses on it.
Yeah, and you can build up or side, whatever configuration.
Whatever configuration, but of course you can't go above 3 stories and that sort of stuff.
So this kind of puts a lot of pressure on Coquitlam and other municipalities to plant public trees and things like that. I know you have been doing that, but
We've had quite a program to go in and create that greenway from the curb to the sidewalk so that we can have street trees. They're, obviously street trees have all kinds of benefits for a neighborhood, and they can't be affected by development because they're owned by the city. Whereas private trees, we've urged and we've handed out tens of thousands of trees for planting on private property.
Encouraging people to plant in their own backyards
Exactly.
as well. Yes.
Exactly. And unfortunately, I worry that there are going to be some neighborhoods that end up losing all of their private property trees ahead of development. And we'll also end up with some where we should have had townhouses, and that could have saved some trees and we can plant. Instead, we have someone that comes in and builds 4 houses on a lot right in the middle of the row. And now you can't.
And there's no opportunity
to do it.
Which is going to have repercussions in the future as our cities heat up, right? It's
absolutely
stormwater management. There's so many reasons to have those trees. So hopefully,
there's so many reasons to do good planning of a city, and for the province to come in and say we're gonna throw out urban planning. We're gonna make all the decisions from Victoria without even looking at the property. Then now we're in a situation where cities are no longer responsible for the quality of life in their neighborhood.
But you're going to take the blame for it.
We're going to take the blame.
Right.
We can't do anything to change it, but there's no question that councils will. One example for Anmore, which isn't affected because it's less than 5,000, but they are affected because they can't say no to suites now.
Yes.
And even though Anmore is almost entirely on septic.
Yes.
And that means that, a suite goes in and now it's twice as many flushes and the septic system is being overrun. And the health department comes in and we're talking about incredibly expensive challenges to the groundwater systems and all kinds of, no, you can't do one size fits all.
And those are big 1 acre lots and stuff too, so there's a lot of space in between there. Anmore is an interesting situation.
Yeah, Anmore, it's the law of unintended consequences. Yes. We just changed it. It had an effect, and one of the effects is now there's raw sewage at the surface, and the health department is saying you can't do that, and there's some properties that are persistently failing in health department inspections. The health department's overrun, they can't keep up, and we're going to end up with some sickness as a result of the density that's being imposed on rural communities like Anmore.
Not a healthy situation for sure. I think you've probably already answered this, but you might want to say a few more words. So there's been criticism about this new mandated housing legislation and densification, saying that it doesn't give cities the flexibility they need in order to sort of realize their own plans and how they would like their communities to look like, and protecting neighborhoods and enhancing neighborhoods. Do you have any last words on that?
Well, ultimately, it's true that the decisions that we were able to make in order to create healthy, complete communities have been taken away. Those aren't. We're not able to make them anymore. So it is incredibly frustrating that, no one wants to go into public life and then just make rash decisions and suffer the consequences. No, you want to try to do your best at making a great community. And when the provincial government takes away that, then I think if it was working, then people would say, well, at least it's building lots of housing. But we're going to have half as many units this year. Wow,
interesting. Okay, so that's housing, and I think we just touched on it. We could go a lot deeper, but
much, yes.
We'll move on to talk about homelessness in Coquitlam. There is a shelter facility at 3030 Gordon, which you're well aware of course, and an encampment at 3020 Gordon. So they've become concerns. There's no facilities there, no sanitation. People are living there under quite dire situation in tents. Can you talk a little bit about what you think the province and the federal government even should be doing? What supports should they be providing, and what is their responsibility in this?
Well, on the supports, I would suggest they start with the supports they promised when they were going to build 3030 Gordon.
So some wraparound services?
Wraparound services for those people who were availing themselves of the shelter. Province has told us it's not a shelter anymore. Now it's permanent housing, because a shelter suggests you could
Somebody's
walk out,
moving on.
You could move in, and
Yeah.
get some people are moving on. But the province just really hasn't supplied the services, the provincial service. This is a provincial mandate. These are health services primarily, and they're not available. So we now end up with a system that the folks can't move through that model anymore. The province also made commitments that what we see at 3020 would never happen, that we're gonna have sufficient supportive housing across municipalities.
So is 3020 Gordon a consequence of 3030 Gordon, the actual facility just being clogged up and nobody's moving out of there, so nobody can move in?
Well, it's partly that. It's the reality is that the homeless population is, we ought not to demonize them, because for a great many of them, these are health-related
There's many
causes that
reasons.
ended up with the folks on the street. No one wakes up one morning in a nice
There
home
but
and
for
decides
fortune?
Yeah, when I broke my back in a car accident, they prescribed OxyContin.
And there you go.
And I was lucky. I managed my pain meds very carefully, but I can only thank my lucky stars, the Lord above, whoever, for the reality that I'm not one of those, because I know other people who were prescribed the same medication and ended up losing everything.
So a little bit of empathy.
So
compassion.
we need empathy and compassion, no question, but we also need services. So as our family's been very public, our daughter was very public with her struggles with mental illness, and we got to see firsthand just how completely inadequate the services for mental health and addictions are. She didn't have an addiction, and she had a family that was advocating for her, and still we could not find the services, and
challenging.
We had to, actually. Yeah, when families are mortgaging their house in order to buy the medical services that are available under the Canada Health Act, but not available because they're just not available. And they're expensive, but they're much less costly than 3020 Gordon. 3020 Gordon and the realities associated with the homeless population, particularly under the current toxic drug supply. That's incredibly expensive. If you're just purely on an economic basis, that's the wrong way to go.
Yes.
But
and
certainly
from a humanitarian,
from health outcomes and a humanitarian perspective, of course. But so no one would design a system this way.
Right.
No one would suggest that we're just going to let the folks live on the street. And yet we have communities like Maple Ridge, for example, who turned down any kind of supportive housing because they kept pointing to 3030 Gordon in Coquitlam. Look at that one, how horrible it is and how badly run it is. And we had some issues as a city. Port Coquitlam and us both joined in on trying to analyze what's happening at 3030 Gordon. We got the Ministry of Housing to do a report, hire a company out of Ontario to examine what was going on there. And they made lots of recommendations. The recommendations haven't typically been implemented.
This is a provincial responsibility.
This is a provincial responsibility.
Okay. So not to say that there's not good work going on at 3030 Gordon. And
Oh, absolutely.
We absolutely need that facility, but that there are supports that are needed.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it can't be by lottery. We can't say 10% of the people who need addictions treatment or 30%, 50% will get addictions treatment and the other ones won't.
Right.
No, we actually have to. I cycle through the Semiquaela property regularly, and Center Lawn always catches my attention. It was the last of the three red brick buildings that was closed about a bit more than a decade ago. But the lights are still on, and the heat's still on, and the floors are polished because the movie industry loves that facility.
Yeah.
And yet, when I talked to Coast Mental Health a few years back, what could you do with a building like that? They said we could hundreds.
What
we
could you do,
We
right?
could, you know,
Wow.
it's not perfect, but my goodness, it's way better than 3020
built.
Gordon. It's built, it's warm. I mean, there's the washrooms, there's,
Oh,
it's
in a
these are
lovely
incredible.
healing sort of environment.
Exactly, and you could, there's things we could do. We certainly appreciate the investment in redfish, but that was $1 million a bed. That's a lot of investment, and obviously if you need hundreds of beds across the province, at least take a look at the buildings that you have that could be
There are options
repurposed.
out there that are maybe not being explored as much as they could be.
Well, North Lawn is even more modern than Center Lawn. North Lawn was Wayward Pines Hospital, if you watch the Wayward Pines series, because it's a fully equipped hospital. But it's empty, it's just used for film. And at a time when we're approaching cold weather and we don't have a place.
Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah. So just one other thing along those lines is that, you know, sometimes residents feel that Coquitlam is actually carrying more than their load as far as, you know, the unhoused population within the Tri-Cities. So we have a mobile population throughout the Tri-Cities, but they all seem to, not all, but largely they seem to end up in Coquitlam, at least the visible population. Can you speak to that? Are the other municipalities, should they be stepping up, or are they doing things that we're maybe not aware of?
I'm not going to point fingers because I have watched, if I were the mayor of Port Moody or Port Coquitlam and I looked at 3030 Gordon, a provincial facility built by the province, run by BC Housing, and looked at how well it's working, I wouldn't want one of those either. There's no question that the externalities associated with 3030 Gordon, that's like several fire trucks a day, fire calls a day, that's police response, bylaws response, if you just look at that from the budget side of it. But if you look at the humanitarian side of it, my goodness, that's the province has given us a really bad example.
But does that not, and I understand what you're saying, but does that not point to the need for more facilities, not less, and not to...
No, absolutely it does. So we've said to the province, because the province says, well, can you give us some more land? Well, first of all, we can't keep subsidizing the province's delivery of their programs since you took away our resources.
So the province should be providing the land or purchasing the land?
The province is the biggest landowner in Coquitlam.
Okay.
There's clearly property that the province owns that would be suitable for this. But not only, I think our local government's reluctant to step up with subsidies for the provincial government, the health ministry, but we're also saying at least fix what you've got, so that if there's a bunch of recommendations about 3030 Gordon, why would you not implement the recommendations and then go to municipalities and say, there, now we've got this new program and this time we're actually committed to wraparound services.
Happening? Like, I don't understand, like, what's stopping that from happening?
I suspect it's simply, there's lots of challenges in the mental health side of it.
Is it financial resources?
There's no question. The province is not in a good financial situation now. That in the last really less than a decade, we've gone from a balanced budget to enormous deficits, and so there is a spending/revenue problem that the province is facing, and critics would say not, or perhaps even causing, but. So I think part of it is financial, but the same daughter that we talked about a while ago who struggled with mental illness is much better today and is now a psychiatric nurse, went back to school.
Wonderful to hear.
And but
it sounds like it took a lot of effort.
It took a lot of effort, but now she's in a system that she used to be a patient in, and now she's a nurse in, and she sees that we're not doing it very well. We're burning the nurses out. We don't have enough staff to be able to, they just increased the capacity of Eagle Ridge Hospital's emergency ward. just the capacity.
But they can't staff it.
They can't staff it.
Yeah.
So if you go there, you're still going to wait in line because half of the new ward is closed.
And we're hearing that throughout the province, shutting down emergency wards and things like that. So it's
I think it
it's a
really
big
needs a
problem.
coordinated effort to say, first of all, how are we going to deal with staffing? How are we going to deal with this? How are we going to make mental health a priority in British Columbia so that perhaps even an ambulance system that's designed for mental illness rather than the current model, which
Right.
is climb in the back of a police car
Right.
with handcuffs on because you're ill. Those kinds of models don't make sense. The peer-assisted models are better, but there's so few of them, and they keep changing the acronyms. But the current one, I think, is a really good system. Well, let's go with that then, even if it's not part of BC Ambulance.
So there are some things we could be doing to.
We could be doing. We could embrace the idea that mental illness is simply illness,
Right.
and untreated mental illness becomes, in too many cases, a dual diagnosis: mental illness and addiction. And
yeah.
then the big problem becomes the addiction, and we have so many people in British Columbia that are now permanently injured by the drugs they took, that this is going to be enormously costly, not just in terms of human life, but also the generation that we're going to hand this problem off to.
Yes.
We're going to say, oh, and you're going to have to maintain care for these.
You've got climate change. You've got this huge toxic drug crisis that was never dealt with. Like, we're passing a lot along.
We're passing a tremendous amount, and we're passing it on to people that haven't been able to buy housing.
Yes.
And so.
Oh, and by the way, you can't have a house.
You
There's
can't
no
have
way
a
you're gonna
house,
buy a house.
Unless you move to Alberta. But if you stay in British Columbia, you're also going to be bearing all these other costs of things that we haven't done in this past decade. We have let slide, perhaps. When I cycle past 30/20, I have such pain for that's my daughter, that's my son.
It could be one of our, our sister, our daughter.
It's somebody's sister, it's somebody's
yeah.
brother. Yeah.
So I agree, empathy is needed too, along with a lot of resources. So just to bring it back to what's happening is right now, I don't think there's any extreme or cold weather or wet weather shelter programs in the Tri-Cities. We're coming up to winter really quickly. Is there anything the municipalities can do? Are there any plans in place to, help house or shelter these folks, at least during the cold months?
So the program has traditionally been developed essentially by community-based organizations.
And churches.
That's the model. And the churches were the ones that have stepped up. And this year we only have one church that's
So there
stepped
is
up.
one.
But not for obviously the entire winter. And the multiple churches we used to hear from, I think, are getting burned out largely because the province has said these have to be very low barrier. They have,
And they're not equipped. They're not safe injection sites.
They're not safe injection sites, and suddenly you're bringing in a population that's using drugs in the facility. And it's a bunch of church volunteers that are there to serve a meal, but they don't,
They're not mental health experts.
It's much more complex now.
Yeah.
And so we really need, for the province to contemplate a different model. This one I don't think works anymore. Certainly it doesn't work with the faith communities. It might work with other buildings like Centre Lawn, for example. This was probably 3 or 4 years ago, at the beginning of COVID, I think it was, when we didn't have a place for the cold wet weather mat program. And I had stood out on the front lawn of Centre Lawn and did a short video on social media saying the heat's on in there, that it's really warm, I'm really cold. We could do something here. And it was in the morning that got played on the radio, and suddenly there was some talk, and we got a bunch of churches, pastors that were phoning and saying, well, you didn't ask us. And I said, well, why didn't the committee ask you? Well, back then they were willing to do this. But it reminded us that there's this building that the province has essentially, with the empty homes, or they call it a speculation tax, said that if it's a building that can house people,
Right.
it must be occupied. It can't be left empty.
Oh,
And so the only buildings in Coquitlam that are left empty, the residential buildings that are
Right.
left empty, are owned by the province and they're at Riverview, and they've been left
Okay.
empty for the last decade.
right.
Surely we could come up with a better solution here.
So is that what the plan is to advocate to the province to get folks in there for this winter?
Well, that's certainly one of the solutions. This is a provincial responsibility, so the province has some decision making to
Right.
do. And certainly in consultation with the Coquitlam First Nation that has claimed the
Absolutely,
site.
there's a land
Absolutely.
claim on that. Yes.
But let's find a solution that supports those people that are otherwise going to be
Left out in the cold.
left out in the cold, running the risk of a propane fire and all of the kinds of challenges that go with camping rough in the wintertime.
Yes.
We've seen too many almost catastrophic situations, and we've seen a few fatalities that come out of the idea that we're leaving folks that
They're
have
vulnerable
diminished
to begin with, and
their
leaving them
diminished
on
mental
their own.
capacity, and
Yeah.
now we're leaving them out there to
Fend for
connect
themselves.
up a propane heater.
Yeah. So I really thank you for talking about these questions, because I know they're not easy questions and they're not always, upbeat, and there's a lot of good things going on in Coquitlam as well. So I'm just going to say, can you just leave us with one thing that you would like to see the city achieve before the election in 2026, the next municipal election? What would be just one thing that you would like to see happen?
I would like to roll back the clock to 2023 before the province changed everything, because we were praised. We were, folks do what Coquitlam's doing. And that, it made me proud when the minister did that. And then a month later, it made me say, well, what are we going to do now? We have a housing target order of 6,500 units for the next 5 years. Unfortunately, those are all already under construction. There's a crane, all of the cranes, when all of those buildings complete, will have met our housing target, and we won't have to do anything else for the next 4 years. Which is good, because we have no applications coming in to speak of. The applications, simply, the market has changed so much, partly because of the changes in the regime that made it so that the financiers in Toronto are nervous about British Columbia, because the government changed so many things so quickly, and some of them aren't good ideas. So my real hope is that we could sit down with the province, municipalities. Coquitlam's got a real advantage until middle of next month, until 2 weeks from now, when Trish Mandewo, who is one of our councillors,
Right.
she finishes her term as president of the UBCM.
Yeah.
So she's been president of the UBCM throughout all of this mess the changes the province made. And it's been her voice screaming loudest. And I wish it could, if I could have my wish, it would be that the province would say, okay, you're right. We should sit down with municipalities and we should properly engage in how do we get housing built? Because it's not about how do we get it approved, it's how do we get it actually built? How do we make it so that my kids, your kids, don't have to move to Alberta?
And make it affordable.
Make it so that we have resources for mental health and addictions in the communities, so that we're not building large facilities to try to house people who are now brain injured. There's some stuff we can do. Housing is the most important determinant of the success of a family and the success of a person. Stable, secure, affordable housing. We can achieve those things, but you have to listen to the people who've been doing it for their whole careers. Sometimes you just have to.
Okay, I really appreciate your insights and all your experience that you've put towards this. And I will never, ever ask you again to say one thing that you would like to see happen, because you told me so many things that you would like to see happen.
It's all one thing. Yeah.
Oh,
Give me everything I want.
Okay. Anyways, thank you so much for coming in and talking. I really appreciate it. And I hope that we can talk again soon, and we'll keep in touch.
Look forward to it. Sounds good.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Nancy Furness, and this is We've Got Issues. We've been speaking with City of Coquitlam Mayor Richard Stewart.